rates of both physical and sexual abuse of children have been in decline. The animal rights movement has brought about a decline in hunting, an increase in vegetarianism, both in the UK and the US, and a sharp decline in the number of motion pictures in which animals were harmed. Well, now the question is, why has violence declined on so many scales of time and magnitude? One possibility is that human nature has changed, and somehow people have had their inclinations toward violence bred out of them. I'm very skeptical of this possibility. For one thing, we continue to see violence in our children. Our 2-year-olds still kick, bite, and hit. Our boys still are involved in play fighting and rough and tumble play. We continue to enjoy vicarious violence, such as murder mysteries, Greek tragedies, Shakespearean dramas, video games, hockey, and movies starring a certain ex-governor of this very state. And in surveys of homicidal fantasies, the question, have you ever fantasized about killing someone you don't like? 75% of men admit to at least occasionally having fantasized about killing someone. What does this say about human nature? It says that 25% of men are liars. A more likely possibility is that human nature is extraordinarily complex, and it is always comprised both inclinations toward violence and inclinations that counteract them, what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature, and that historical circumstances have increasingly favored our peaceable inclinations. Well, what historical developments brought out our better angels and stayed our hands before they could result in acts of bloodshed? One possibility is that Hobbes got it right when he identified the Leviathan, a government with a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence as a force for law for peace. A judicial system with a monopoly on violence can neutralize the incentive for exploitative attack by penalizing aggression. That also reduces the need for preemptive attack by those fearful of being attacked first. It reduces the need to maintain a belligerent stance of deterrence, and it eliminates the need for revenge after the fact. In particular, it circumvents the self-serving biases that humans are prone to, where both sides to a dispute always believe that their opponent's attacks are naked, unprovoked aggression out of the blue, but their own attacks are justified retaliation after the fact. When you have both sides believing that you can have endless cycles of vendetta and blood feuds, which outsourcing revenge to a disinterested third party can circumvent. The second possibility is a theory of gentle commerce, that plunder is a zero-sum game. The gain by the victor is equals the loss to the victim, whereas trade is a positive-sum game, one where everybody wins. And as improving technology allows the trade of goods and ideas over longer distances, among larger groups of people, and at lower cost, it becomes cheaper to buy things than to steal them, and more of the rest of the world becomes more valuable to you alive than dead. The third possibility is called the expanding circle, and it starts from the observation that humans are equipped with a sense of empathy. But unfortunately, by default, we apply it only to a narrow circle of blood relatives, close allies, and cute little fuzzy animals. But over the course of history, one can see the circle of empathy expanding to embrace the village, the clan, the tribe, the nation, other races, both sexes, children, and perhaps eventually other species. This just begs the question of what expanded the circle, and technologies of cosmopolitanism are a plausible answer, that as people increasingly travel, read history and literature and drama and journalism, they begin to see the world through the eyes of others and have more trouble demonizing them. And indeed, there's experimental evidence that when people are encouraged to adopt the perspective of a real or fictitious individual, they not only sympathize with that person, but with the entire category that that individual represents. Finally, there's the escalator of reason, the possibility that the growth of literacy, education, and public discourse have encouraged people to think more abstractly and more universally. They rise above their parochial vantage point, which makes it harder to privilege their own interests over others. They are encouraged to stand back and recognize the futility of cycles of violence, and increasingly see violence as a problem to be solved rather than as a contest to be won. Some historical evidence is that abstract reasoning abilities, as measured by IQ tests, increased over the course of the 20th century, the so-called Flynn effect, and other studies have shown that people with higher levels of education and intelligence are less likely to get into violent disputes, and that countries that have higher levels of education and intelligence are more receptive to democracy. The final question I'll ask is, why do all these forces seem to be pushing in the same direction? And I think the answer is that violence is what game theorists call a social dilemma. It's always tempting to an aggressor to exploit a victim. Of course, it's ruinous to the victim. Since over the long run, victors become aggressors and vice versa, all parties would be better off if they could all somehow agree to avoid violence simultaneously. The dilemma is, how do you get the other guy to renounce violence at the same time as you do? Because if you beat your swords into plowshares, but the other guy keeps his as swords, you could find yourself at the wrong end of one of those swords. Over history, one could well imagine that human experience and human ingenuity have gradually chipped away at this problem, just like we've dealt with other scourges of the human condition, like pestilence and hunger. And the common denominator among those four historical forces is that all of them have increased the material, emotional, or cognitive incentives of all parties to avoid violence simultaneously. Well, regardless of what the best explanation of the decline of violence turns out to be, I think its implications are profound. For one thing, it calls for a reorientation of our efforts towards violence reduction from a moralistic mindset to an empirical mindset. Instead of lamenting, why is there war, perhaps we should ask, why is there peace? Not just, what are we doing wrong, but what have we been doing right? Because we have been doing something right, and it sure would be good to figure out what exactly it is. Also, the decline of violence, I believe, calls for a reassessment of modernity, of the centuries-long trend that has eroded family, tribe, tradition, and religion, and which have given way to individual rights, cosmopolitanism, reason, and science. Now, everyone acknowledges that modernity has brought us many gifts, longer and healthier lives, less ignorance and superstition, richer experiences. There's always been a current of romanticism and nostalgia that's questioned the price. Is it worth it if we have to live in the shadow of terrorism, genocide, world wars, and nuclear weapons? If, though, despite casual impressions, the long-term trend, though halting and incomplete, is that violence of all kinds is decreasing, it seems to me that calls for a rehabilitation of the ideals of modernity and progress, and it's a cause for gratitude for the institutions of civilization and enlightenment that have made it possible.